You are listening to The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill.
Standards. Well, they affect all of us every day, wherever we go, whatever we do. By defining good practice, they help people, organisations, the economy and society to do things better.
And every year, standards-making bodies around the world publish thousands of them for all sorts of things. For some of the big stuff that affects all of our lives, like the Net Zero Guidelines, an international standard that helps provide a common reference for governments and industry.
And it's not just the big stuff, it's the small stuff too. There's a standard for pen caps, which reduces the risk of asphyxiation if pen caps are accidentally swallowed by children. Amazing, really.
And then there's everything in between, from standards that help organizations to protect customer data, to guidance on the right way to use AI in medical devices, even to the cables that charge our smartphones.
In fact, for you to be able to listen to our voices right now, you may be using Wi-Fi. Well, that's all down to the IEEE 802 series, international standards.
And standards like these are made by standards makers, tens of thousands of people from around the world who get together to agree good practice to the way things are made and done, all helping to make our lives easier, safer, and more enjoyable.
Hello, this is Matthew Childs, and this episode of The Standard Show is my conversation with one of those standards makers, Dr Maria Tomlinson. Maria is lecturer in public communication and gender at the University of Sheffield. Her latest research is around menstruation and the media, reducing stigma and tackling social inequalities. And she chaired the standards committee that developed the groundbreaking standard BS 3416, menstrual health and menopause in the workplace. I spoke to Maria about why she is a standards maker, the impact it's had on her career, her proudest standards making moments so far, and what advice she has for anyone looking to become a standards maker. But I started by asking Maria about her academic journey.
Well, I'm currently a lecturer in public communication and gender, but I've taken quite an interesting and unusual career trajectory because actually my PhD was in French literature. So I've moved from actually humanities to social sciences. So I really enjoyed studying languages as an undergraduate student. And then when I decided I wanted to do a PhD, I think I've always wanted an academic career, actually, ever since I was quite young. And by young, I mean a child. I always said I wanted a PhD. I did my PhD on women's experiences of menstruation and menopause and how they're represented in novels. I'm from Algeria, France, and Mauritius, so they're all in French. Did that for my PhD, really enjoyed it, turned it into a book. But there were so few jobs in French studies, I wasn't quite sure what to do. So I actually ended up doing a job here in the School of Journalism at University of Sheffield, just working on someone else's research project. It was about women and they needed a French speaker, so I did that for a while. And then I was fortunate enough to have a research project that I really wanted to do funded by the Leverhulme Trust. So I spent 3 years doing research on the period movement, on social media, in the mainstream media, and its impact on young people. So that involved interviews with activists, doing focus groups with teenagers across schools. And I've just submitted that as a book. So that should be published at the end of the year. So kind of my background is academic. And I first heard from the BSI, must be a couple of years ago now, maybe even more, because they'd seen my research posted on social media, they come across my website, and they were looking for someone who had expertise in menstruation, menopause, and communication. So that's how I got involved. And when I was asked to chair the committee, I was delighted. I thought, what a great way to use some of my research findings and my expertise on communication to help women and other people who menstruate.
So Maria, let's get to it then. So what standards do you make? What standards are, should I say more specifically, what standard are you involved with?
Well, I led the committee that created the absolutely groundbreaking and pioneering standard on menstruation, menstrual health, and menopause in the workplace. So that's the one that I've worked on. I've also been talking about maybe having some input into another one on menstrual products as well.
How important is it for you as an academic to use the research that you do in this practical way? I mean, when this sort of call came from BSI, how pleased were you to receive it?
I was absolutely thrilled. I mean, for two reasons. The personal reason is that I've always really valued academic research that has a positive impact on society. So I was so personally happy about the opportunity to make such a big difference and to kind of be so instrumental in another step that takes us closer to gender equality. But also career wise. So there's so much more emphasis these days in universities on impact. So, our work, our research that has an impact on society is valued. There's something called the REF that happens every few years, and we get evaluated on the quality of our research. But certain people can write case studies as well about impact they've had. So that looks really good on you career wise. So it was just really good in terms of professional development and personal satisfaction, I guess.
Now you've been involved. You've been involved in the standard. You were chairing the committee. Tell me about what did that involve?
It involved a lot of online meetings. So there was a period of time for a few weeks where we had a meeting every Monday morning for 3 hours, which was a really big commitment. But fortunately, because I was on a fellowship at the time, I didn't have as much teaching, so I was able to give that commitment every week. So it involved kind of making sure everyone in the meeting had their say. If there was differing opinion, kind of coming to a compromise, but also kind of reading through the standard quite a few times. Kind of one of the main jobs I saw myself doing was kind of looking at how the standard was communicated. I was really keen to make sure that it was inclusive of trans people and non-binary people as well, who have kind of traditionally not been factored into these kind of policies. But I also wanted to make sure that it was kind of really clear that, of course, the vast majority of people experiencing this are women. And I wanted it to be clear that kind of this discrimination is grounded in a kind of history of discrimination against women in the workplace. So it was about kind of getting that balance as well in that document to make sure it was inclusive. So that was quite a difficult balance, and there's lots of differing opinions on how to do that. And then they went out to public consultation, so we had to respond to those comments and had to think about kind of which ones to integrate into the standard, which ones were helpful, which ones were not helpful. Did other jobs like working on diagrams, making sure things are clear. I wrote bits of the standard as well. So it actually involved quite a lot of different skills.
So you got involved in all different aspects, really. I mean, I'm interested to know about that experience because obviously you went from not being involved in standards at all to
Yeah.
being invited and then chairing the committee. How was that?
It was a really big responsibility, which I obviously took very seriously. And I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I've led other things in academic spaces like committees, so it's kind of applying the same principles. And Nell and I worked really closely together. And after each meeting, we'd usually have a discussion about, what we're going to do in terms of what happened in the meeting and how we're going to take it forward to the standard, who to delegate work to. So I think professionally that was a really good experience as well. And we had like so many fantastic people on the committee from lots of diverse backgrounds who had really amazing suggestions. So making sure that the standard was inclusive of women of colour as well was really important, and making sure that their voices were amplified in that standard as well. But also besides kind of working on the actual standard itself, I've done quite a few talks for the BSI as well since it was published. And that's been really good as well because I've been talking to a lot of kind of organizations and kind of both commercial and otherwise. So before I got involved in the BSI, it wasn't really kind of workplaces that I was involved with in terms of impact. It was more kind of at an educational and community level. So that's been quite interesting.
Now, Maria, obviously you've been involved in this standard heavily. You've talked about some of the motivations for you getting involved. I just wonder, what keeps you involved in standards making now? Are the motivations the same?
I think, yes, actually. I think I'm really keen to be involved in, and I will be involved in the creation of an international version of the menstruation menopause standard. And I've got a background in transnational feminism, which means I kind of have a good understanding about different kind of cultural differences and societal differences, religious differences, and how these influence experience. So I'm keen to kind of build on what I've done with the UK standard to ensure that the international standard is also something that's really useful for organizations and relevant to them as much as possible, but something they can also kind of nuance and adapt to suit their own context. A bit like with the current standard, how it's one of those things where you can adapt it into your current workplace policies. So I think, yeah, professionally it's important to continue. It will be more pathways to have impact on society, on gender equality. So from that perspective, I'd like to continue. And also, I've just really enjoyed working with the BSI. I've got on really well with everyone there, and it's been really nice to hear such positive feedback about my research and how it's actually helping with workplace policy. So that's really validating, and the opportunity to speak to new audiences outside academia is also a big plus.
You mentioned a couple of really important things there, Maria, about impact and about workplace policy and practice. I just wonder, now that you are a standards maker, you've got this insight now and this experience, why is the work of standards makers like you so important to, UK industry and sort of wider society and the economy and consumers and everybody really, towards all UK stakeholders? Why is the work of standards makers like yourself so important?
Well, it's so important because, workplaces need these guidelines because, especially with the standard that we made about menstruation and menopause, having policies and practices and approaches that are inclusive of people from diverse backgrounds is so important for equity within the workplace. It's important for creating a safe and inclusive environment for everyone, and that will just benefit the whole organization. So these standards are so important for people's well-being and career prospects. So we've spoken before about, women leaving work at a younger age than they would like to because of not being able to manage menopause or feeling that they can't talk about it within the workplace. So that is obviously having really negative impacts on women and on society and on gender equality. So if we can ensure that people have happier lives in the workplace, improved well-being, this is going to benefit them, it's going to benefit the organization, it's going to benefit society. So for me, the kind of social benefits of standards that really engage with equality, diversity, and inclusion is absolutely huge. And I know the UK government as well has taken an interest in the BSI standard on menstruation and menopause. So it'll be interesting to see how that might affect kind of future government policy, potentially around healthcare. So I think the implications are actually really wide.
Now, you mentioned career there. I just wonder, sort of switching this back to a personal level again, what has been the impact of being a standards maker had on your career?
It's been really good in terms of improving my professional standing. So it's increased a lot of awareness around the research that I'm doing. It's given me opportunities to work with more organisations. So, for instance, there's a particular organisation I've been working with, and they heard about me because of the BSI. And I'm now directly working with them to use some of my research findings to improve inclusion in their workplace, which is really cool. And as well for me within the university, it's been noted that I'm doing this work that's having a positive impact on workplaces, and the University of Sheffield as well as my employer is using the standard, which is great. So yeah, really good in terms of professional development, in terms of building my knowledge exchange and impact skills, my position as an expert in the field and things like that. I'm getting more and more media appearances. Don't know how much they're linked to the BSI, but it's certainly something I've mentioned when I've been interviewed for the BBC or kind of other media outlets. So as well, one key thing that working on the BSI standard has changed for me is that I'm now actually thinking about doing research on workplaces. So I've had colleagues at the university approach me to work with them on a research project about hygiene practices in the workplace. So because of my involvement in the BSI for a few years, I've now been seen more as someone that has expertise on workplaces. So it's ended up with me being invited to do research on workplaces. So it's actually fed back into my research. So for any kind of researchers that are listening to this, getting involved in a standard could be really good in terms of knowledge exchange and impact, but also then might inform future research too. So it's something to bear in mind.
So clearly, being involved in standards has had a real impact, not only on your research and on your professional practice, but also on your profile too. I just wonder, what's been your, so far, do you have a proudest standards making moment?
I have to say that I think the clear moment that was just really inspirational was when we had the launch event for the standard. The fact that 10 years ago, when I used to talk about menstruation and menopause, people thought I was strange and I had derogatory comments from audiences. Why are you talking about that? You shouldn't be talking about that. That's so niche. Such kind of negative responses from some audience members and just questioning why on earth I was doing research on menstruation and menopause, to a really proud moment at the launch event of the standard when we had 200 people in person in the audience, maybe more, and hundreds of people online. There was just so much interest in this piece of work we'd all done together, and so much appetite in the UK to improve women's experiences of menstruation and menopause in the workplace, to create a more inclusive environment for people of all genders. So to see that was just really inspiring. And as well, I just found out recently that the standard has been nominated for an award as well. So I'll be going to the awards event.
Now, Maria, it'd be fair to say that being a standards maker is having a really positive influence on your life. But what advice would you give then to anyone else considering getting involved in standards? Why should they volunteer to take up this role?
I mean, I can only kind of talk in regards to other researchers, but I would really recommend other researchers to be involved in the BSI, because it's a really great way of using your research findings to have a positive impact. So it really builds your profile as someone that does knowledge exchange and impact. But also because you're going to meet such fantastic and expert people when you're on that committee. And it just really builds your networks. I've done further work with other people on the committee. We invite each other now to various talks we're doing. We're getting involved in projects together. So it's really good in terms of building your networks, actually. And I've invited some of the people I met on the committee to be part of an advisory board for a future project that I'm doing. So it's just a gift that keeps on giving, I have to say. And I can see myself having a relationship with the BSI for a long time. If you're someone that does research and wants to have a positive impact on society, being a standards maker is an amazing way to do that. You'll not only make really great contacts within your field, outside academia and within academia as well, you'll also be able to put your findings into practice and have a positive impact on the workplace. It's something that is personally and professionally really rewarding.
Now, if like Maria, you too want to be part of the standards community, having an impact and making a difference by shaping standards for healthier and more inclusive workplaces, or if you want to create smarter transport solutions or help organisations to be more energy efficient, or maybe you really want to make a difference in the field of medical devices or baby feeding products, or maybe managing food waste, it doesn't matter. Whatever your thing, get involved in standards. We welcome applicants from all fields, backgrounds and career stages. Our goal is a simple one: to have a balance of views around the table. So start that standards journey now. Details of how to do so are in the show notes. And the show notes are also where you can find details of our socials and all the other ways to get in touch with us here on The Standard Show.
You have been listening to an episode of The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, with Matthew Childs and Cindy Parakill.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.
Oh, that's nice.